So hello and good evening. Welcome to another talk in the Videogram series featuring Rossella Biscotti. The work of Rossella Biscotti and her practice is cross-disciplinary, is a montage of materials and formats such as sculpture, installation, video, sound, and performance. By working with archival material in situ and field research, oral history and testimonies, Rossella Biscotti explored event revealing the changing nature of value systems. Her work consists in revisiting and reviewing histories often swept under the carpet by the authorities and political power structures in order to override events and shape the official history or the official narrations. She reveals places historically marked by extractions, exploitation, political oppressions, and the restrictions of freedom. Her works narrate spaces, stories, and their interconnection with human and non-human actors, speaking out against the violence of institutional structures. Rossella, thank you for coming and being with us today. And here I would like to turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for this wonderful presentation and for inviting me to this lecture. I will, you already introduced my work quite well, I must say, within the general context. So I will start sharing maybe already my screen with some images and go over it, mainly within the methodology of the work and talking about 3 projects. One, we go from the beginning, which was the picture I gave for the presentation of the lecture. So, as I said, I will talk mainly about the 3 projects that developed through times, and I thought this imagery was quite interesting to use. Is a work. This one from 2015, but somehow it started in 2009. It's called The Heads in Question. Here you see a photo from the production of the work. And somehow I think it's also very interesting because it talks about Italy and how there has been a change lately in the last also 10 years into the politics, and now art can reflect that and can work around it. So I will talk about, as I said, the Heads in Question. That's the title of this work. Another work, so here you see in the presentation of 2009, another work is The Trial, which the research of the trial started in 2006, and then it was mainly developed in 2010 as sculptures, as you see here, and then later on as a series of performances. And the journey, which has been a project that I started in 2016, and later I developed into a performance in 2021 and 2022. I start specifically by this work also because I wanted to reflect around in this period in 2009. For me, it was very important to think about also monumentality and what does it mean to create art also in relation to politics, and to create art. Also, what you see here is also portraits. There are many portraits of a dictator and a king. And I wanted to reflect also on history and how in that period in Italy, it was the history of fascism. It was coming back somehow into the architecture. I did a very long project in researching what was the fascist architecture in the 30s and in the 40s in Italy, and how in 2006 it started, especially in Rome, which is the capital, a renovation of this massive architectural project. And it was very interesting to see how symbols like that were very connected with fascism, like big heads, for example, on Mussolini, or big murales, or big obelisk, were completely cleaned up and put back in public space or in offices in their original shape without any removal of symbols that were connected with the fascist regime at that time. So I was interested in seeing and also somehow questioning what was happening in the politics, but of course through art. And in 2009, I was invited from Noma's Foundation. It was a private foundation to propose a show. And I had already researched at the time a particular neighborhood is called Eur. I will show you maybe some of the building of this place. So Eur is a neighborhood that was developed for the World Expo 42 that actually never happened because of the break of the World War II. And this one was the first building that was developed. It's called Palazzo Lufici, the office palace. And it was the place where all the architects were, and they were basically there to develop the full neighborhood. The full neighborhood, it was, of course, planned, but all the buildings were well built also after the war. What you see here is also, for example, this neighborhood, how it keeps these statues. But at that time, when I started working on it, the majority of these things were, let's say, not well maintained. So and at that time, it was this neighborhood was being used and started to be used for businesses. So in a way, there was a very clear plan that they wanted to clean up the neighborhood also from their history. What you see here is, again, in the Palazzo Lufici, there is a big relief with the Mussolini on a horse. And here you see how is now Fendi took the headquarters of the building, and it became also somehow one of the buildings that is the most famous backdrop for fashion. So somehow at that time, I will skip to a catalog of the show. So my proposal for the show was to take from this building, actually the storage of this building, these sets that I found being stored there, and to transport it directly in the exhibition space. The idea was really that they will be what you see here. They were like stored inside of the storage of the building. So they were together with table. They were completely removed. Actually, they were with dust, and they were unshown since the Second World War. So since they were taken out in 45 of the building, and probably they were collected in this Palazzo Lufici and put in storage. And the actual company that owns the building didn't know what to do, so they were never used or taken out of the storage. So you see also the transport of the heads, and I decided to use them as they were in the storage. So basically don't clean them and leave them as they are on pallets, also with the dust on it. Also, I think what is very interesting is that in the images of exhibition, you always see the show with no people. Well, I think in this particular work, for me, was very important, the relation in between the people and the sculpture, because of course it was not only about the sculpture, but about how this sculpture will be like displaced, will put in a different location, and as the title say, will put in a sort of discussion or question. It's very important also the difference of they were made for being seen in a scenographic position, probably from the bottom. They were standing on a very high pedestal or on top. I know, for example, two were made for being in a very big room on shelf that were very much on top on a wall, so that people will see them from far away. Also, their way of being sculpted, it was quite cartoonish somehow. It was very, very strong. The features were very strong. So the relation within the show is for me very important, the relation between the people and the sculpture, and also how they were displayed. They were somehow made in such a way that you could turn around and you could see them from all different perspectives. So changing completely the idea that you will see this artwork from only one position, that it was given by the, not only by the artist, I guess also by the commissioner as a sort of imposition. This is a period in which I was very much interested in also in the idea of monument, but also especially in what is the responsibility of the artist, or somehow how the artists deal with politics, for example. And in this case, what you see here in the catalog is I found and published all the correspondence between the artist and the commissioning body that was called EUR. There was the World Expo, basically the World Expo office. And also later on, you see also the contract I made with the EUR that became a company with the same name for the borrowing, for the loan of the sculpture. And also like what were the conditions that we ensure this sculpture for being there. The sculpture were actually in the show only for 2 days, only for 2 days fully. And then later on they were moved to the, they were moved back to the storage, and the exhibition space stayed empty. And at the end of the show, there was only one picture on the wall. And at the end of the show, I made a lecture that were going through the whole history of the EUR as a neighborhood, and then of all the letters that I published in the catalog. In 2015, I was asked by a museum that is called Museum in Bolzano, that is the north of Italy, and is in an autonomous region, to make a show that will collect some of the works I did. And they were very keen on having this work display. Of course, the conditions were changed somehow from 2009 to 2015. Both the political condition of Italy, but also like what all these buildings that I was interested in, and also the heads, were somehow resurfacing from the storage and were back into public positions. Actually, later I found one picture in which you will see these heads display in the office, in the actual offices of the contemporary company EUR. So I decided that, and also I didn't want these heads and this sculpture to be displayed in a museum, so being musealized. And I decided to create a new work which bear the same title. It's called The Heads in Question, and to cast this sculpture in a as you will cast if you want to reproduce something, to reproduce an artwork, to reproduce a sculpture. So I asked actually a group of restorers that could create cast, and I had to have a special permission for it from the Ministry of Culture, because the heads were protected somehow because of being very old. So, and also because there is a law for against falsification. I found this very interesting, the idea of creating basically molds in which this culture could be produced and reproduced again. And somehow also thinking about history and what is the role and what happened with these symbols of dictatorship, in this case, the fascist, of course, regime at that time. And also I was also very aware of, as I said, the change of politics. For example, in one of the pictures that I show of the transport of the head, you see some posters in which there is some election posters for the mayor of Rome that was at the time turning towards a right wing. So it was very contemporary in the politics. Also, to let you know a little bit of the reaction of people at the time of the show in Rome, it was kind of mix, but basically the show was attacked both by left, because left-wing people, because they were, and also journals, because they were against showing them, against letting emerge this imaginary again, but also from right-wing people, because they didn't want this to be touched. And there were also some nostalgic people visiting the show, and overall, many people did the photograph at the time. I don't think there was selfie, but they photographed the various, they photographed themselves with the heads. So here it's completely different. What you see, it's mainly in the exhibition. What you see is like this reproduction. I use this blue silicone. You use it normally for reproducing for these molds, but also when you want to have, I don't know, for example, when you find these souvenirs, they are usually reproduced with this sort of silicone. And for me, it was interesting to have something a little bit more pop that would speak about also this polishing of, for example, of this building, as I show that now they are headquarters of fashion brands or other companies, and how this is used also within the within a lifestyle industry, for example. But at the same time, for me, it was also interesting to create something that will talk about the idea of coming back, of reproducing, which is not exactly the same, but is like something similar, a copy, and something that comes in a different time, in a different world. Actually, the title of the show, it was, wait a second, because I would like to move up so you can see I will move this so you can see the captions. Or do you see only the screen? You see yourself, or you see only the screen?
We can see the blue silicone sculptures.
You see the captions now under the...
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
perfect.
yes.
So the show was called "The Future Can Only Be for Ghosts," and it was taken from Derrida quote, but also for me it was very important. It was combined with a series of work that were talking about Italy and the very particular and very specific complex relation between history and politics within the Italian context. I will not go too much inside this, but also I want just to show you how this culture itself, I mean, they were again placed on palette, which of course refer to the original presentation. So it's also a reference to that work. But for me, it was very impressive also how this sculpture, when you will go, you will take a distance, they will become sort of three-dimensional. So somehow this emptiness of the mold, it was interesting that it will also create this sort of ghost itself, also physically or aesthetically. And here, as I mentioned in the beginning, you'll see this from 2016. You don't see the date, I think. 2016 is the heads. They are put back inside of the office. This one was sent to me by an art historian. She found it somehow while talking about this work. And also it's interesting how, I don't know, whoever did it, probably somebody that was reorganizing this official office of the company thought about putting them on the floor and not on pedestal. So I don't know if that was coming because of the show, or somehow it was a reflection on themselves. But somehow these heads are also out of storage completely and back inside of office and public space. Before maybe coming to another project, I just wanted to mention why also I wanted to talk about this work, because in this work I'm talking now, which is called The Trial, and also in the later work, The Journey, you will see there is a starting point that is always about memory and also about a sort of sculpture and monuments and how to somehow commemorate something or to talk about something without a certain, not only monumentality, because of course these sites are very monumental, but also including what is the relation with the spectator. For me, that's very, very important, how you perceive, how you can, even with culture, how you can insert yourself as a viewer, as spectator, and not having only one perspective on the work. I think later on, and also I always call the heads in question, especially the first work I did for the Nomas Foundation in 2009. I call it intervention, and later on you will see how this work developed also into a performance. So for me, the relation in between sculpture or a sort of installation and how this can become a performance that is not a performance how you will imagine something like on stage or something active, but a performance in the sense of something that includes us as experience, or something that is a shared moment in time and space. So in a way, these three work also are, you will see how sculpture turns somehow into this, and is probably this blurry kind of format is what interests me, and also like really the moment in which something that is more meant to be described as installation or to be described as sculpture, it can turn into something else. So here it's this is a very complex project that took many years, but again you see 2006 this one is been started at the same time. This is also a fascist building. It's called Casa della Scherma, a fencing academy. It was made in 1938 by a very famous and very talented architect called Luigi Moretti, which is probably the most functionalist of the fascist architects. And this Casa della Scherma was part of a sport complex. And at a certain point in the end of the 70s, it was turned into a courthouse. And the first trial that were handled there were political trials. I visited first time in 2006 while I was trying to understand. And again, you see here, you see a sort of set of the courthouse, but also you see a bit rundown. Somehow later it became more rundown. It was really the last period the courthouse existed. And I knew this building was going to change and then being renovated. And later on, it became a sort of space for events. So you had also artists doing things there, concerts, sort of exhibition spaces. And for me, again, this moment, it was very interesting. And it was the moment in which I wanted to operate and trying to move really the meaning of this building from what it was. And also what it was a courthouse, but also it was, before of that, it was anyway a fascist building, to what will be an entertainment building. So this 2006, I simply made this picture, and I was at the same time trying to follow up what will be the future of this building. Also because at that time, when I made this picture, it was very difficult to operate inside because it was a secured building. So we had to be accompanied by police and everything for very tight time. So I knew that that will not be the right condition to work. In 2009, I attempted making a film. I had a bit more time, in the sense I was granted a little bit more time. And actually, I made a film with the building completely empty. So having a very nice shots in different positions. But then I realized of everything I filmed, the only thing I liked was the moment in which there was the person showing the chuck. And then I realized that I didn't want this building to be empty. It was a ghost in itself. And I wanted the project to develop differently. So in 2010, I was invited, and I go off and I go back into the buildings. So you can see them. So this is Casa della Scherma, which is the building I'm talking about. And as you see, is a rationalist building with very beautiful line with like mosaics as typical for that period. And I was invited at that time by the Maxi Museum. It's a museum, a contemporary art museum in Rome, which had just opened its door. So it was this very strong landmark architecture by star architects did. It was one of the first show, I think, maybe even the first show, but in one of the rooms of the Maxi Museum. And for me, it was very interesting because this museum, it was exactly in the same, let's say, position that the Alba bunker, this courthouse. So they were only separated by a river. And later, in this project of remaking this new Rome and very fashion Rome, they built a bridge, which is the bridge of music that connects exactly these two spots. And somehow, again, I wanted to reflect on the architecture and on these two landmarks and connects them in between each other. So I will show you this. So I started to think of how to flip these two locations. So the Aula Bunker, as you saw, has this sort of set of trials and these museums with these big halls, and both they are, of course, on concrete. And I, at the same time, I started to work on. 1 second. I started to work on the. No, nothing. I want to move on the. Do you see only? Okay, I put it here. I started to work at that time on a series of archive, and particularly on this trial that I found it very interesting. And then later on, I developed into the project, into the main core of the project. This is a trial of that was handled in that courthouse. As I said in the beginning, was the courthouse. It was it became the building became a courthouse at the end of the 70s, and it was specifically dedicated in the beginning to political trial, which started with the 7 April trial, but also the Red Brigade trial. At that time, basically in the whole 70s, it was 10 years of struggle in Italy, and there was a worker struggle, student struggle, and also at a certain point it turned into a various movement of our armed struggle, which they started to be prosecuted towards the middle end of the 70s. And in particular, this trial was important for me because it was not a trial against one particular movement, but was a trial against somehow a generation, and it was the defendants. I mean, the people that were accused. They were accused of I don't know in English, but going against state, creating going against state, basically of plotting a coup and taking over the state, so that it was a charge that would be punished with life imprisonment. And at that time, also the majority of the people that were accused, they were also part of a sort of intellectual and left intellectual that will also be present in university. Many were professors, journalists, cartoonists. They were very involved in the cultural scene of Italy. On the 7 April, that was the first moment in which there were the arrests, and there were around 70 people taken over. And then the trial, it became also very much followed by various people. Some went also in exile because it was basically they tested on these people a lot of what were the conditions that were later used, for example, for mafia trial. That included, for example, 5 years of imprisonment with no no trial, or different charges that would be dropped and then give a new one. There is a very specific terminology for it. They use repentance and people that maybe committed crime, and they were given full freedom if they would talk against some of the defendants, and that was also a way to break down all the relation and the network that was created at that time. But I mean, the trial is very complex, but basically what also was very interesting for me was the first, I would call it movement, but it wasn't really that specifically, because a lot were just individuals that will act politically, that decided to talk. So they decided to defend themselves inside of the trial, because some other, like the Red Brigades movement, completely refused the state, so they will just not participate in trial. Instead, the 7 April defendants, they decided to defend themselves, and basically what I worked on was the archive of the recordings of the whole trial, which included basically all this speaking of I forgot the English word again, but this moment in which the courthouse invited the defendant to speak. So I organized the full archive of the 7 April. Actually, was recorded by a radio that is called Radio Radicale, and it was all online, but it was quite disorganized. And so I went through all of it, and especially with the help of some of the defendants, I could recognize some of the voices and understand how they were placed within the trial. Also through the help of a newspaper that was doing a clip every day and an article every day on the trial, I could see who was talking and then going through this organization. Here you see one of the defendants with one of the repentance, and it's also very interesting how there is a difference of age. They were also called the bad teachers because they were usually professors in university, and they were accused of basically teaching this politics to the younger generation, and then will take up arms and going against the state. So it's also a very dramatic somehow trial. So basically how I developed it was to go back to this idea also of the building and how this building holded somehow all these stories and this memory. I tried to transfer what was the Aula Bunker inside of the Maxi archive by casting some of the important places of this building, but mainly not of the building itself, but all the surfaces that were basically consumed by all the people that were tried inside, or all the people that were part of this structure of the courthouse, let's say the judge, the lawyers, the public, etc. And what you see here is basically discussed. They are made in concrete, and they are also set inside of the space in a sort of relation, which is a relation that is also a sort of narrative relation. The first one, what you see, this square, is a cast of the floor where the judge is a plastic floor that has been consumed by the chair of the judge moving on it. And the last one is, for example, a microphone that has been taken out. When I cast it, it was impossible to detach it, so I just cut it off and I left it inside of the concrete piece from where the defendant were speaking inside of the cages. Then you see the bars, you see the stairs, so where the defendant will be going up to and then surfacing the courthouse with this view. So to give you maybe a bit of a better view. Here you see, for example, the cast of the bars. And Also, how this was developed for me was really related to, and also was coming from conversation with some of the defendants. And for example, this one also was the idea of this cast also came from one article, one on the defendant, in which he was talking about the space that is in between you and the courthouse. So you as a person that has been is on trial and is inside of this cage, and maybe the people that are in the public that are some of your family or intimate or friends, and how this space is very thick and very material somehow. And that's the idea of this casting of bars, is also like to making concrete this sort of space, the representational space between the inside of the cages and the outside. I show you briefly this. Also, you see how some of the surfaces remain on top of the cast. These under the courthouse, there are cells where the prisoners are handled until the trial starts. Also, I think it's also quite interesting to see somehow the sculpture into a context, and then to see them decontextualized inside of the exhibition space. And then you see the same, how they are cleaned up and they become sculpture in an exhibition space, while before they are a strange materialization of something. I think maybe also this feeling of seeing this culture in exhibition space, it really made me think of how I could somehow get back life into it. In the first exhibition, what I did, it was, so at the Maxi Museum, I placed the sculpture in the hall that I showed you in the beginning, where there are these weird, like a staircase and slope of the Maxi Museum. I had a sound piece, which is a 6-hour sound piece that was going all the time of the museum was open, and it's editing of the trial itself. So you hear the voices of the defendants. I will not going through this sound piece now, because it's the whole sound is in Italian, but I will speak about it with the performance, and now has been then translated not only in a different language, but also for different public. But to give you an idea, so in the museum, in the Maxi Museum, you will enter, you will hear this sound that was very contextualized somehow for Italians, because they recognize the words, and even sometimes they recognize some of the voice of the defendants. For example, one very famous is Toni Negri, and politically has been very charged in Italy. So some of the people will recognize, for example, his voice. They will recognize the topic that are being spoken. So it will be like somehow like entering a courthouse, and then they will encounter the sculpture that are a kind of set of the place. And then the day after the exhibition, I invited some of the defendants, some friends inside of the courthouse, as a sort of, again, what I call a performance, but it's more an intervention, and basically to roam free and to be going around the space and somehow recollect stories, look at things. And it was the first time for some people that they could actually re-enter the building and also go wherever they want and take their friends, their wife, and also meet up each other again. So this one was the first presentation. And what you see now in this image is in Documenta 13, is a second presentation of this project. This from the meeting inside of the courthouse. And this is a second presentation of the project in Documenta 13. What I did at the time, it was to include a translator of the sound. So the sound will be going on, the original sound in Italian. And for Documenta, I had it only sometime a translator would translate in a different language. Actually, in 2011, so in 1 year before Documenta, I developed this into a unique performance. So there were no sculptures. And it was only this sound and a typist and a translator. And this is the space of my studio in the Rijksakademie. For me, it was very important, this complete change. So it's again the same title. It's the same, if you want, topic, the same material, but the focus is completely different because it's really on the trial itself. And here you see in Documenta 13 this performance, it was for me becoming very central to the piece, and also how this culture that we have been seeing so somehow dry, alone in the exhibition space, they become completely different in the relation with the public, also the people sitting, that somehow it's, for me, what was important, and you will see in this image, which is just an iPhone picture of that I took, it's that this exhibition space, it becomes somehow a square. So it becomes a place of sharing, a place in which you can discuss, and this it's not only a bare translation of one language to another one, but it's a way to reactivate the content that was discussed, the political content that was discussed inside of this trial. Again, you see how also the sculptures somehow they become part of this, again, as a set of a sort for this type of action that is happening. And the action is somehow also from the public itself. Thinking about that, I started to really develop this performance into something else, trying to translate in different cities, thinking about how some local actor, that could be artists, writers, or political philosopher, they could translate this content, again, not only from one language to another one, but also somehow through their body and through their biography. So here you see the preparation for New York. This is the preparation for the performance in Brussels, how this was not just a casting, like, for example, sent by the institution saying on Facebook, I would like to do this, but it was really a thought that things that will go through a network of friends or of people that I think they will understand, and they will suggest the right person that could make this translation. Here you see New York, here being translated by the artist Adelita Usni-Bey, that is also very engaged political artist. You see here the political philosopher Michael Hart translating a part of Tony Negri in the trial. And also, again, how the space, also because it's 6 hours continuous, it becomes not only a place in which you come and you stay very stiff to see a performance, but also a place where you take a pizza, you drink, you talk. So you kind of not only engage with the content, but somehow you engage with the people that are present there. And here is in Brussels. Here also, again, this content, it became part of a case study for the Konstfack, University of Art in Stockholm. And then we created a performance later on with the people that participate in these reading groups. And here is myself. This was my first time to translate. And also I decided I wanted to be part of it and not only part of the organization. So also engaging myself with one of the defendant content. I translated at that time Paolo Virno, and Joanna Barsa, curator, and also at that time, also now director of Konstfack curatorial lab program. So in a way, it was also interesting how then this, for example, it was not only like being invited by an institution in this case and looking for other people, but engaging really the same institution that invite you, then the same kind of group of curators that invite you to discuss the content and also perform themselves, and also through their body and through their knowledge and biography, translate the content of this trial. Here we are passing through a different project, and afterwards I'm going kind of fast because of course this project, they are very long in their research and then development and change. But we will open up with question, and maybe I can go back and clarify certain part of it. But also I would like you to think about the relation in between each other that I think are very strong. And this work, what you see here is a stone, is a big piece of marble. And actually it's generated in the same time of the heads in question, because in the backstory of this performance of 2000, and here it says 22, but it's actually 21. It's the backstory of this performance is actually the show that I had, a group show in which I was invited. It was handled in Carrara. It was an international biennial of sculpture. And I created a work that was not in marble. Carrara is the place in which there is one of the, not one, but many quarries of white marble, and has been mined since century. And of course, also giving some of the marble for very important sculptures of that we know of the Renaissance of Italy, like Michelangelo, for example, but as still very active and still very much being extracted at the same position. So what you see is like a very, what they call a marble statuario, that is like a very shining, almost like diamond type of stone marble. Very precious. I created a work in 2010 for this biennial that was not in marble. It was in with LED letters, LED movable letters. It was referring to an archive, using an archive of anarchists. There was a very strong anarchist movement in Carrara that was connected with the workers that were working in the marble quarry. And I won a prize that is called Premio Michelangelo, and the prize it was a block of marble of the dimension I wanted, being extracted from this very famous quarry. And of course, I didn't know exactly what to do with this marble. It was a very old prize that thought of an artist as somebody that could take a material and just make something out of it by sculpting. But I knew from the beginning I wanted to do a project. And I started to think that I will extract or like think about using this marble for something that will not be a sculpture that will enter the market as a sort of sculpture or monument, but something that actually will work opposite, so we'll work on the disappearance. Of course, it's so this work really again goes back on this idea of monument, as I said, it's like it goes back to this moment of 2009, 2010, in which I was also reflecting on sculpture, and I was reflecting on the role of the artist producing these pieces and putting these pieces in society somehow, and these sculptural pieces. And then at the same time, in around 2011, I was traveling mainly in the Mediterranean Sea, and at that time I was confronting also what was the situation with the migrants there. I have later on. I will jump a bit there. This is, for example, a photo from 2011 of a map that has been drawn on a piece of wood of a migrant map. And what you see is the route taken with some of the references to go from Libya till the Lampedusa island. And what you see is the references are the burial field and the islands of Kerkena in Tunisia on the left. So I started to think about, I wanted to have this marble being dropped in the sea, in this area that it was the Central Mediterranean Sea. And I started to think about this area as a sort of public space that somehow we have no very much knowledge about. I was very intrigued by the fact that when you travel a sea, somehow what you see is a surface, but the sea extends down in the depth, and also it has layer and layer of history, layer and layer of ruins that are under the sea. It has lines that have been drawn, as we know, the border lines, for example. But of course, when we cross from one country to another one. I mean, some borders are quite funny, like the one between Netherlands and Belgium. They go through bars and things. It's quite, but somehow on land you kind of know where are the borders. While on sea, things become a little bit blurry to maybe not people that are very much aware. So I started to compile a series of maps, and these maps then they became an exhibition that is called The Journey. So The Journey has been, first of all, for example, a map exhibition that compiled this series of maps that were for me a script for a performance. Here you see, for example, a map that is, here you see an exhibition view with some of the maps on display. And also my idea was to create a sort of horizon that will be in a room that will be much more like somehow very empty. And you could somehow navigate. What I wanted to have, it was really the feeling to be a sea and not feel lost, but having one horizon and then having to find your own information to navigate through it. So this has been the show that I built for the Fanabe Museum. And then, of course, if you go to it, there are a lot of details. So thinking about, for example, this layering of the bottom of the sea, for example, here you see a lot of some of the Second World War relics that are underwater, and also how we always imagine there are many. So some are identified, some not. If you go on websites of amateur, you can see the sea completely packed with relics. This information instead they come from official governmental bodies, so they are more specific, but they are also just the ones that they have been identified, and also how they are, for example, full of stuff. They are huge things full of stuff, but also they lay close to other things. They lay close to cables. Here you see, for example, some of the cables. At the same time, I started to collect from, it was 2016, and it was from the Italian Capitaneria di Porto, which are the military body that is taking charge and controlling the sea, but also like receiving and controlling the migration in Italy. So I downloaded at that time some of the requests for help of boats in distress. And when I was there in September, traveling by sea. So these are also part of this navigational charts. This, for example, a map in which you see what were all the military operation, or maybe the one I could find, military operation at that time, and how do they cross each other. Here is always all representation of sea. There is no land being drawn somehow. And here, for example, how they are all divided by borders, by licenses of, there are licenses of oil and gas, and they are divided by various companies. So some company we know, like for example, Eni and Total, and some company are kind of collaboration between private and governmental companies. So it's they are maybe less known names, but basically again, this all water, and there is this very weird shape of borders being drawn on it. As I said, this was my script for a performance I realized in 2021, in which I took this block of marble from the quarry of Carrara. I call it block for simplification, but actually is a rock, has been extracted in the old way, so by following the vein of the mountain in such a way that could be extracted and having a more natural shape instead of being cut with a chainsaw as they usually do. This performance has been developed for Kunst and Festival des Arts, which is a performance festival in Brussels. And I participated in 2 editions in 2021 and 2022. In 2021 edition, I was part of the festival, but actually I was at sea. So I basically was in Malta, which was my starting point, which is the island in the Mediterranean Sea. And then for 3 days navigating along a route that was designed really following up those points that I collected in the research. I will show you more about it. We had a ship, a very old ship with a crew. The flag was Malta. The crew, it was from Philippines. And we navigated with this ship for 3 days till dropping this block of marble inside of the water. And in 2022, always in May 2023, we created a performance that was mainly a sound performance inside of the festival, again, Kunst Festival des Arts in Brussels, and in the space of Beaux-Arts. So these are the 2 editions of the festival. While we were at sea, we were not in any way broadcasting. We just left, and the performance was announced in the festival, but there was no way to follow it or to know about it. There was just an announcement in the moment in which we left the harbor of Valletta in Malta. What you see is just documentation picture of actually the traveling, and here is the development of the route that, as you see, was not going A to B, but it was really following all these lines of research. For example, going from geological till the one most straight are the one of oil and gas, and then ping-ponging between relics point and also like some of the points, GPS points given to me by Alarm Phone, which is an organization that at the moment, actually since 2014, I think, or 15, starting to collect and to respond to all the call of the migrants that are in distress at sea, and then calling up what are the reference that are close by boat or state that has to intervene at that time. And it puts together a series of things that I researched and I was interested about, and it was actually a performance of a ship navigating. What you see here is the red line is a turtle that was released by Nature Trust Malta, and this turtle was traveling along the sea, and we follow a little bit also a track at a certain point. Here you see again the route.
I move little bit.
Ah, yes, yes. And also how we will be.
I don't want to cut, but the boat. We will hit doing like this.
Also, how somehow all of this needed to be negotiated with which was the reality of being at sea. And for example, here at a certain point, we had to perform with the ship a very sharp turn to be on this very straight line. And but actually, we had another ship that was very close by, and the captain decided to not do it because he thought the other ship would think we are crazy and we are going to hit them. So, because of course, these really sudden turns are not performed at sea. So it's, or here you see the turtle that has been tracked. And then also some of the changes we had to make, they had to do with weather, because as soon actually we entered the Libyc Sea, and exactly where the turtle crossed the line of Frontex, it's we had this very strong wind, the Scirocco wind, that really created a very bad weather, and we had to completely change our route and also our dropping point change at that time. I mean, wait, I'll pick it up. Was it Luis? I'm showing this because what's happening is we had a satellite phone. I gave the number of the satellite phone to Alan phone. Usually what happens is like they have very few ships that give that number to be called in case of there is a distress very close to them so they can be reached. Otherwise, they need to be reached by radio, and usually it's very, very difficult. And what you see is also the satellite phone is not working. So how things happens are very complex, and also like the whole weather situation basically disrupted the whole trip. Later, I got to know that we were not so close, but there were actually people in distress at sea, and that they tried to call us, but we were unreachable. So that's also something that I really dealt with, and it was very difficult to think about afterwards, that we were traveling and actually we didn't help somebody that should have been helped and was kind of close by. They said that we were too slow with our ship, so they found a better solution. Very rough, so we navigated in a different direction till finding a quieter sea where we could drop. And this is because also the operation was very mechanical and very simple. So the ship will be tilted by ballasting water that was put inside of the ship. And then the rope will be cut, and the platform that was the wooden platform that was on top of rolls of metal will slide down, and the block will drop into the water. So we needed to have a very flat sea, otherwise everything will be going inside of the ship and could be extremely dangerous. And here you see the block being dropped and disappear. So what you see here is mainly documentation of this performance, which are not the art piece, are documentation I use for lectures and to talk about the project and how it developed. The performance existed just for the people that were there. Somehow that's kind of similar with whatever happened in the Aula Bunker at the day after the Maxi opening, where I invited some of the defendants and some other people to be in the building. I filmed with the 8mm at the time, and there is a little video that I show sometimes, but there is no really much other documentation of that. So here again, I decided I filmed. I never edited the film, but at a certain point while being on ship, I also started to think of the fact that I wanted to represent all this work mainly through sound, and that's because somehow we have been recorded a lot. I worked with a musician called Attila Faravelli, and with him we have been recorded on ship. He was invited on the ship, and but also we have been recorded on the shore of various countries that are around, so Malta, Tunis, Italy, and I started to think really like of the ship and the sea as something that is layered vertically, and also like it could be a sort of ears sound that arrive till the coast, and now these coasts somehow are really like producing sound that it kind of arrives till the sea. So really starting to think about this way, how this sound expanded, and how it could create a narration that was not only on seas specifically, but also on the coasts that are around, but also like somehow a narration that would talk about these various layers of this area. So you see, for example, here some of the recordings. They are with the Phoenician amphoras from an archaeological project in Malta. They were retrieved by a 150 meter. They were 150 meter underwater, and somehow they were really interesting on the historical level because of the trade. They really represents what was traded at the time in that area. But also we started to think again of this amphora as sort of an object that could give back a sounds that is not about using it with a sort of percussion, but really recording the resonance that are inside, or recording how the surface is producing sound by being touched, and this surface is not anymore the one only made by men with the clay, but it's also a surface made by the sea with the old marine incrustation, etc. Here there is a link of archive. I go out, I can show you. This was our first, oh, it's been closed. Our first presentation of it. Sorry, I think I have, oh no, here. And so we made, me and Attila, we made this archive, is a sonic diary of this journey. Is not complete because it was made in 2021 when we didn't travel yet to Tunisia, where we went along the coast to record. So it starts with the extraction of the marble, which is here, and then it goes over the resonance of the amphoras, the rough sea, and this is a very interesting interview with the archaeologist, in which you will hear a strange resonance. I don't know if it makes sense that I make you hear you now. And every sound is also explained in its context, but also in the way we record it. I learned a lot from Attila, like how each tool somehow it produced a particular, each tool that he uses, it produces a particular materiality of sound. So for me, it was very interesting because I'm always very attentive and very precise in the way I use material and in the way material narrate themselves, part of the story I want to communicate. And Attila, he really managed with me to create something sound-wise that is precise for communicating something. He records a lot with the Nagra, which is this old reel recorder produced in the 60s, and we also use it sometimes within the performance. I will make you hear a little bit of part of the departure of the ship. So when we started to, and you have it here, when we started to navigate, and this been recorded, this somehow is a slightly narrative in the sense you hear voices, but it's not completely. It's also very much sound. In the performance, we use it within the sounds, other sounds. So it's not something that has been really translated or subtitled or is part of the sound itself. Attila recorded with the Nagra recorder. What is interesting is this departure really took long time, so maybe 3-4 hours, and of course he edited directly within the reel, so he was pushing on and off and deciding which moments to record. And for me, for example, this is very much similar to me filming in 8mm at the time of the Aula Bunker. That was really like how to translate also you, but being there, but not in a documentative way, but also like you being there also in an experiential way. We probably wrote something much more technical about it, but I will.
Yeah, good to go. Valletta for control.
Yes.
Valletta port, Chandela Valletta.
Chandela Valletta, Belvedere.
Valletta TS, Chandela Valletta, احنا departure 10 minutes more or less.
وإحنا قبل ساعة بالكون.
Copy Valletta هيطلع قبل.
Valletta port control Herato. Herato, Valletta Valletta. Valletta port control Herato permess biex nidħlu l-port il-kbira, ħna ħammorru l-MMH.
noaptea, că Vaita și așa nu la Casamara. Okay, thank you. Permission to cast off from Mena and go outside territorial waters with Soho Square.
Also, later on, we traveled to Tunisia and we recorded there. It was part of a what they call residency, mainly within performance art. So being there a few weeks and then build up the performance. So we mainly used it for recording on the coastline. And at that time, it was very interesting how we introduced both. We really faced and these Gebes, for example, and we really faced this issue, how to record, for example, pollution, how to sound record pollution. So with Attila, we were mainly dealing with how to record plastic, how to record a dirty sea or a dirty river that is becoming almost like fungus, malmoss. And it's and also what we introduced some of the narrative content in the performance, which were many interviews with this Tunisian activist, Karedin Nabaya from Stop Pollution Movement, which in the performance in Brussels, we used one of the recordings being translated with subtitle, but later on when we performed in Tunis, we asked him to come live. So it was part of the live intervention within the performance. And here you see one of the most incredible and touching place is in Zarzis. It's a cemetery, what they call Cemetery of the Unknown, has been built by a fisherman, Shamsuddin Marzouk. He, since 2004, he started to collect bodies that he found in water and to give them burial. And then at a certain point, he started to give them burial in a cemetery. Then he was not allowed anymore. And then he asked for a land where he could bury people. And he was given a landfill, so a garbage dump. So he cleaned up as best as possible. But then this is where he has been buried. Bodies also in floors, as he called it. He's already on the second floor. And you see here the tombs with some, they are identified or with date or with the DNA of people. Here it's what you see is a gate. Also, it's the sound, it was very strong. There is a part of the interview with Shamsuddin, which talks about basically, which is very touching because it talks about organization or bureaucratic stuff. And then when he talks about the bodies he found, he cannot describe them. Of course, he has images coming in his mind, which are very fragmented as the bodies in themselves. It's, but when we were there and we recorded Shamsuddin talking there, and then later Attila was recording on his own, which is actually this picture here. And we recorded this fence, which has been placed exactly last year when we were there. And he didn't have keys to enter the cemetery anymore. It was put by the government. And this fence was making a sound. And basically in the performance, you hear actually the banging of this gate and the banging of this fence, which later on we found out it was the same note of an instrument we had recorded in a different city in Tunis with an ethnomusicologist that was studying this instrument called the gogo, that was taken on boat by fishermen, and is a very big like percussion instrument, and it was taken on boat so that if they will get lost on sea, they could play it and people will hear it with a very long distance. So it's, I'm telling this because I'm coming to this last part of this project, which is the performance of 2022, which was the sound performance. And that is not anymore single sound as I showed in the Sonic Diary. So, but it's a composition, it's an 8-channel sound composition, which is played in this space. This space is Beaux-Arts. It's an exhibition, very official exhibition space, Art Nouveau in Brussels. I chose one of the unrenovated room in the space. And also, again, I work around creating really an experience and with the public and with time. The performance was happening at sunset. That's because I wanted to have the darkness for people to concentrate on sound, but also I wanted them to enter by knowing where they are. The location was very particular. Not many people knew this room because it's not very much used by the exhibition space, because it's what you see is also like the walls are broken up. And so basically it will, while we were there, and it's mainly like people laying on the floor or sitting, the light will go down naturally, and then we will be in almost darkness, and then there are some lights part of the performance. So the performance is a 8-channel composition, which is interrupted, is overlapped sometimes by intervention that are done with my mobile phone, which these are amphoras that we borrow from a museum. And I also somehow play with their surface, with some object to create sounds and contact mic. And then there is an interruption that where I invite other artists to perform inside, so to have some sort of intervention. One of the artists which performed both in Brussels and in Tunis was Attila Farabelli, that has been recorded with me. If you're recording, and he will play on the Nagra some of the reel we recorded. And it was very important for me that this intervention, they will go from what is a very environmental sound of an 8-channel composition to something that is very small, like having one voice and one sound. So it will make, for example, listen the sound of wind on the ship, or it will, or it will make the sound of a paddle, where you will hear both with the hydrophone, both the creature that will live in this paddle, but also like the reverberation of the sound of rocks and some of the voices around it. And but also like some were really physical, and physical, like a person reading this. She's a trap poet, Joël Sambi from Brussels, and she had written her own text and also performed it at the same time. For me, it was very interesting how, for example, even the physical presence will be in the sound, in the sound performance, perceived sometimes as sound, and people will find themselves comfortable to be still laying without having to watch who is reading or who is performing at that time. Then there was, there was also, Joël Sambi was with Nicolas Pommier, and Juan Pablo Pacheco Bejarano was did an intervention online. He works on many research in between technology, colonialism, and history. And he worked, he wrote and performed the text that was mainly was about underwater cable connecting South America with Europe. And there was Sintujan Vararajan that performed a text again on borders, but mainly within the Asian, South Asian regions. Here you see other pictures, and these somehow the journey in Tunisia, which was adapted but also changed for the space there, but also for the research we had done there. And here you see a part of the reversal. So there is not much public, but you see the context again. It was in an open air building, a sort of courtyard. So we were outside, but also like within the walls and the porticos of this building. You see also the amphoras are not anymore this ancient amphora, but they are amphoras use from fishermen. Also, you see more tools. They are because we actually interacted more with this sound composition by playing on it and overlapping reels, overlapping sounds, and that's also, it was again me and Attila Fararelli, and as invited guests, there were a group of fishermen and fisherwomen, which performed a series of lists of fishes and basically by memory fishes, sea states, parts of boats, etc., etc. So they were live recollecting words, and on the right you see the activist Keradin Dabaya, and which it was very interesting. He performed towards the end, as actually where his text come in the recording, and it was within the context of the journey, which is 1 hour in Bozari was 1 hour 40 minutes sound work. His presence was very disruptive and very beautiful, because it will come up with the lights will go on, the microphone will arrive, and he will have 4 minutes mic to talk about what's happening in Gebes and about stop pollution movement. And he actually woke up everybody, then afterwards clapped, and it was towards the end of the performance. So this is a very, very short and brief presentation on these 3 projects. Would like to end with one little song. Yes.
البابور فيه.
This is part of the fish. I would like to end with this little song that we recorded.
Hindi ka na kilala na, ako'y malaya pa, at hindi ngayon ang puso ko may kapiling na. Bakit ba hindi ka na kilala na, ako'y malaya pa, sino ang ibigin? Bakit ba hindi ka na kilala na, ako'y malaya?
It's that's also to give a bit of backstage of this inside of the boat, in which there were a lot of karaoke happening by evening. So we decided to record Rico, which was one of the Marineers singing, and he's also part of the composition, of course. And it's for me very important to show it, also to see the context also of that was very nice in the moment in which we were navigating, and was, of course, it created very strong relationship at that time. I'll go back and stop sharing so we can see each other. Oh, sorry, I'm a little bit. Oh, stop share. I found it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you too.
It was a bit long, maybe. I hope it's we are still on time for questioning.
Yes, I really enjoyed Attila enjoying the process of recording.
Yes.
Yes. So Rossella, thank you very much for the lecture, your talk, and also the masking, your practice, its narrative and stories behind it. With this, I would like to open the floor for the Q&A. So please feel free to ask the questions directly or just write them down in the chat. I would like to start with the question pointing back to the head in question. As you mentioned, during the first display, you had a critical response, like from the both sides of the political spectrum, from the left and from the right, like the left, pointing to the thing that you are like showing again the problematic faces of the regime, and the right as like the construction of the monumentality as the head that should be like never touched. Then we have the blue silicone imprints, which is, as you mentioned, technique of mass production.
Yeah.
Also, like often using for built souvenirs. And I'm very curious about the process of like, yeah, it does like the process of the reproduction is in some way like very symbolic, especially in the current state. Here I'm pointing to the latest elections in Italy.
Yeah.
And the things like how the things are being reproduced. And my question is like why to retell or review histories in a way where historical period is shown as it perished, or that is the historical period that is shown in some way in a current moment. Like why to retell the stories back again in different language?
I mean, I think that's really a central point, because of course is first of all, the why I think is very central, because it's not just about showing, let's say, something that belongs to history, or like showing an archive that is closed, or closed in the sense also like that feels far away and feels not connected to what is reality, but contemporary moment and contemporary reality. But really like, I think especially with the heads in question, but also with the trial, I really felt we were a beginning of a process that is probably really now is very visible. So this beginning of the process, it was made visible by the renovation of these buildings. And it's not only just the renovation, because as Italians, we have always lived in fascist building, because during the fascist regime, there was a lot of architecture being made and a lot of building being constructed, also building for where people live, for example. But somehow it was really like the symbols that were on this building that were shining again in a public space, and there has never been a debate about it. So I think also this is very different, for example, than in Germany, where that many things have been debated, and there has been a discussion around it. And I think somehow there has been a lot of nostalgia that transformed in different forms politically into what is the new Italian government at this moment, which is very different from the historic fascism. And they want to take now, especially, they want to take distance, but somehow many things go back into it in a different form. So for me, this transformation is very interesting, and also like really working and bringing back this material, not in a general form, but really in a materiality. So bringing back the heads, so you as a spectator can see it and can really like go around and see, okay, it's like this, you can touch it. It has a different type of experience. And I think also bringing back the words of Virno, of Toni Negri, and then so having the original there, and then having a translation that talks about contemporaneity with also a physical body, also an embodiment that is a contemporary person that has maybe a specific research or a specific political agenda, is for me very important, bringing these two things together. And what it comes out is also something that, again, the spectator can comment and can discuss, and doesn't need to receive as something untouchable, or something that is still can participate in this discussion, or in this reviewing of the historic material.
Yes, thank you. And yes, now I would like to point to the piece, The Journey. As you mentioned, like during the way back, you got this like strong wind, and which kind of like changed the the things how they were planned. And I'm referring here to the road that should, please correct me if I'm wrong, that should follow the Green Stream offshore gas pipeline, which is connecting Libya with Italy, and it was also in some way presented in a very like opulent image in a collaboration of like Mussolini and Gaddafi, if I'm correct. But still is a road that is very oftenly being used as a navigation tool for people migrating the Mediterranean. Was this reason why you were trying to follow this road? Or did you...
It's a pipeline that connects Libya with Italy. Has been inaugurated in '94 from Berlusconi and Gaddafi, and is of course is very important because, and now especially in this contemporary moment in which we are struggling with energy after the war, but it's also like it determined what are the politics of migration and also the agreements between Italy and Libya within migration politics. And so for me, it was very important within this script that I made for the route. The last part, it was a series I would follow in a sort of what I call constellation, a serious GPS point of that were given to me by in various years by Alan Ford, and I made a selection, and I will follow these constellation points, then drop the block of marble in the Libyc Sea in a very shallow water, just off what they are. There were the European charts, and then go back with the ship following this pipeline. So that was the original route, which got disrupted. In relation to the migration, so not only like the agreements between this country are the ones creating the border. So for people, it's basically the agreements within the Italian government and the Libyc Coast Guard that blocks people from entering Europe. And but also, of course, it's quite interesting because when I started research in 2011, a lot of people were coming off from Libya with this ship, then turning off the motor and having this wind, the Scirocco wind, pushing. So it's an extremely difficult and dangerous operation, but it happened many times. And so basically you go pushed by wind. So it's all this part of the central Mediterranean, which is also the same route followed from the map that I showed in the beginning, this migrant map, that exactly connect, in that case, not really the shore of Italy mainland, but Lampedusa Island, which is one of the first locations that they can reach together with Malta, but Malta is also very dangerous. These are the two locations that are very close by. In relation to currents, there is this horrible story narrated by Shamseddin, the fisherman that created the Cemetery of Unknown. The reason why they encounter so many bodies in Zarzis is because of a current, that actually whatever is dropped between the border with Tunisia, Libya, and Lampedusa, it turns around and it ends up on the shore. So it's really a natural things, a natural current that is there. But basically, what happens is that they found a lot of not only bodies, also like boats and safety jackets and everything that is dropped, it ends up on their shore. So this is the situation of the particular location, which is that part of the central Mediterranean area.
To stay with the journey, as I understood it correctly, the piece itself is still open and it's changing its forms.
Somehow I mean, I also show this project and the way they change, and they keep their name even by changing, because for me, in a way, they are that. They are important till they can talk in a contemporary way, in a site-specific way. The journey somehow has this format that is a little bit like the trial performance. It has a composition that is always the same, with the intervention that change inside. So while in the trial, it was basically the sound piece of 6 hours was always the same, and the people performing were changing, and the language and the location were changing. So the journey, every time I invite different people, because I also like somehow the idea that is connected with the public. That will be listening, but also I like this idea to enrich it every time by someone else and a different story and connect it locally. And also it's a little bit like traveling by sea, that you encounter different situations, different people, and they enter the story. The whole journey has been like this, has been constantly open to these encounters.
And when it comes to the research itself of the journey, because there are like many aspects that are involved. Like we have the let's say the geology of the time, yeah, which is the formation of the marble itself. Mm-hmm. Also the history of art, like how the marble is used as an artistic material, but also like marble as a market mm-hmm. product, and its logistic. And also the devastating effects that are happening to the landscape, all the sea aspects and the social aspects that the mm-hmm. sea question is opening. Is this already closed, or is like still something that is open for like more research or more investigation?
Yeah, there are still some aspects I'm interested in that I didn't have time to research. For example, while I was in Tunis, I started to be interested in this gas connection between Algeria and Italy. That it was made in the first. It was the first agreement. It was in the 60s, and it passes through Tunisia. So I wanted to analyze that and to research it a bit. It has a very particular story connected with the development of Eni, of the company, oil and gas company in Italy, and also like at that time what is called now CEO of Eni, which was Mattei, directly financed the Algerian revolution to get a better deal on the oil and on the later business agreement. So I thought this is again something that we are facing now in the contemporary situation, and it was a pipeline that would directly. It was only dedicated to the industry of the northern Italy. So again, there is all these layers being there that are like of the industrial development post-war, but also like how this agreement between North Africa and Europe were coming about in different form at that time, and basically laying down what is now the current political situation or the current agreement in between companies and government, which we are facing now.
And when it comes to your working methods, I'm like very curious about the trial piece, where it's, please correct me if I'm wrong. So the trial piece itself, it last like 1.5 years when it was happening.
Yes.
And you compress it into 6-hour sound piece.
Yeah.
So how you like, what kind of method did you use? So like how you like through which keys you did this reduction to the 6-hour piece?
Yeah, it's I mean, some things were determined by practical issues. The whole trial was on tape, and some of the tape were actually not good anymore. Some were recorded on top. So, for example, I was looking for women that were trial. Some of the actually teachers they were trial, and but they were not present because of some of the tape were destroyed or were useless. And then there was a question of I gave a lot of space to defendants. The trial, of course, it was many things. It was a lot of testimony. It was lawyers. So I basically within the editing, I used half of the time for having only the defendant speak, and sometimes being interrupted by the judge. I restructured the whole piece. So the trial was, I think, even by alphabetical order. And it was mainly conducted by the judge asking questions, the defendant talking. Often they will have a first statement, and then there was an interrogation. And then there was lawyers, there were what I call intervention from the cages, which are also very important in my editing, because within the trial that talks about politics between the 68 and 78 is really like 10 years span. The intervention from the cages were about the contemporary condition of the detainees. So it was about the prison and how they were living, and hunger strikes and everything that was happening in prison. So they are really like a breakthrough, this kind of recollection of political history. Then I basically chose some of the people I wanted to edit, and I decided to work on a time order. So starting from 68, so testimony I will talk about 68, and then going till the 78. And I edit in such a way in which you have, for example, first Toni Negri talking, and then each has a particular character, and I stressed it. Like, for example, Toni Negri and the judge, they really confront each other a lot. He never managed to really speak because he gets interrupted all the time. The backstory of, the 7 April trial is a very important and political trial, and also like is a trial from the Communist Party. So it's so the judge, he was very knowledgeable, so he would question Toni Negri, or like having some comments on very specific stuff on Lenin, on Brecht, on politics in detail. So in a way, it was very specific for that reason as well. Or like, for example, the lawyer or one of the victims, he was a very famous partisan. So it's politically was very strong also content-wise, because they were all people that could actually talk and have a very strong knowledge on history and politics. Then I will, but also like the trial in itself, it was very structured by people. I broke that, so I left sometimes a question of Toni Negri be answered by someone else. So I created more collective voices within it, till a certain points in which there are a lot of screams from the public prosecutor, and I break it, and all the other, the structure and the bureaucracy and the whole court becomes much more visible, and the defendant voice, it kind of is pushed down. So the second part is all about the machine, the bureaucratic machine. So it's, as you see, it's very kind of different structure that it makes it more narrative somehow, and be able to be listened. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting to this. Like Toni Negri is asking a question, someone else is answering the question. This in some way creating somehow like the protagonist as a fictional device, let's say. So is this point of your practice somehow important in the process of realizations?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really also there is kind of it's interesting because with sound editing you don't actually really realize how much things are added because you take it as part of the sound. But for example, there is a lot of sounds of photo camera flashes, and or there are a lot of things that stress the fact that that is a trial that is very is on TV, is very public, is very and somehow is followed, you know, and it's very it's very fictionalized on itself. It's very constructed. The whole story that is put up by the prosecutor is very constructed story. And but for me, it's also, I think in general, this idea of how to narrate something, it kind of includes a sort of fictionalization, as you can call it. And that can be, of course, in editing, but I talk also about editing with sculpture more often. So also the display of sculpture for me is a sort of editing, or editing of information, because somehow as a spectator, you go around and you create your own narration through it. And this is for me very important.
This is also bringing me to another question, and like what kind of methods you used for the selection of the imprinted objects for the trial?
It's they were coming some from stories, basically. So, for example, this Star case was one of the defendants that was telling me how strong it was the moment of going from these cells that were underground to surface the light and the public and the whole courthouse. So how important was this moment of going up the stairs. And some are very power position, like the one of the judge. Of course, the bars, they were very important. And but somehow they try to represent also the different actors within the space. So the judge, the defendant voice, it comes, so there are also position, one at the beginning and the other one at the end, the chair of the judge and the voice of the defendant at the end with the microphone. And then the stairs, the cages. One is the stairs of the public. The other one is in between the doors of the cages for opening. So it's really in between people and space. How do they interface?
I'm not sure if this is something that can be said out loud, but I really like the story how the pieces end up at Documenta 13.
Yes, you know it from different narration, let's say. Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I can narrate it. It's not a problem for me, but basically the pieces were created for a prize called Premio Maxi at the time, I believe, or Premio Italia, I don't remember, which I won, and it was in 2010. And then I was invited by Caroline Christophe Baccagier for the document of 2013. And she thought she could have the Maxi Museum somehow supporting my participation in the show, which was something they were trying to do with every artist, trying to connect also in a national way, or like connect with somebody that could support. In that case, it was not the production, but the transport and my participation in the show. But this didn't happen, in the sense that the Maxi Museum wanted to actually to not contribute, but to participate somehow, but they didn't want to contribute economically. But also they did it in such a way that they didn't want us. There was also other two artists invited in the same way, other two Italian artists. They didn't want us to make this public. So publicly, it will seem like they support it, but actually they will not do it. So this, of course, was very complicated for us as artists, because it was even worse by having somebody supporting you like only on paper, but actually then having to find your own money. So there was a bit of a moment, and at the end I decided to reproduce the sculpture. So I went back again into the courthouse, and by the way, I never had permission to do that, and I was only by getting the key and be able to enter the building, but then we never had formal agreement to do that. So I just reproduced the sculpture, and then they were transported very cheaply to Documenta 13 and being installed there directly as copies somehow, so without any institutional support at the end. Yeah.
Thank you. Because there are no more questions, so I will like to end this talk with the last one. Even like now, as you described the way like how the pieces find their way to be shown at Documenta, but also what you show in the process of building up the journey piece is somehow presenting you in like a very civil way. It's like it's a worker of an art, and this is like something that I really appreciate in your work, that there is always like this like scent of a punk, if I can say. So yeah, is this something important in your practice, like to to be like looking for these like small paths where you can cross to the solution or to the process, yeah. but also the thing that you are very often like showing the documentation, but also the documentation of the administration of the process, which is like very like pointing, which is like describing like in some way like demasking the artistic practice as really as a work.
Yeah, I think I think that's very interesting. It was much more present before. So before I will have a very strong also documentation in relation to processes, because I was always dealing with institution in a very bureaucratical way. And it was very interesting to me to see how this institution and sometimes institution of power will answer. So it was also a way to describe which kind of relation can an individual or a citizen / artist can have with such an institution. Like, for example, I did with FBI, or also here with this company, or sometimes with the, of course, with the Ministry of Justice and other type of institution. The solution, I mean, finding the way, it's also, of course, it's frustrating because it's like in the first step, you want that things go as you plan. I mean, of course, it's like, it's frustrating to think like, oh, there is bad weather. Now we have to change the full plan, or like, but then after a while, it creates something else and it creates a different story. And I think it's also relooking back, it kind of it gives new material to the work. It enriches somehow. I think the best example is probably with the production of the sculpture of the trial. It was somehow it was very rough, the production. Also, we had to be very fast because we didn't have permission and everything. And we were working with a group of workers from Rome, Romanian, Italian, and we had to detach one of the sculpture that I show. It was the corner one, and it wasn't. It was coming off, and then they started to kick it, really like kick it off, and of course it broke on the sides of the bars, and I was a little bit shocked, of course. And then after, and I was filming, so it's on this 8mm film, the kick, the banging, and everything of this sculpture. But then afterwards, we look at it, and we were together, and this worker commented, and he said, "Rossella is more beautiful," and because it had all these broken pieces, and of course, the paint, it came off, or when I had to cut the microphone and left it inside because I could not detach it and everything. And it was a very simple way to say that actually it's like within this process, the sculpture, instead of being neat, concrete cast, it was taking something more, because it was taking something from the building, it was taking something, it was recording something of the process of production, which has been made in that particular location. And I think that's really strong, and that's very important. So for me, it's like while I work, it's important to acknowledge this. So to not stick what was the exact plan, but stop 1 second and say like, he's right, it's more beautiful. I mean, which means is actually, it really includes everything of the history that I wanted to narrate. So it's more interesting, it's more important than what was my original plan. Thank you. With this, I would like to end the talk. Rossella, thank you a lot for your time, for the presentation and the talk. Also, to the participants, thank you for being here with us. And yeah, looking forward to meet in the flesh. Yes, meeting soon. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Ciao, and have a nice evening.